in the vast landscape of science fiction television. Few franchises have endured with the same passion and loyalty as Star Trek, and within that universe, few series dare to go as far as Deep Space Nine. It had everything: action, moral complexity, political intrigue, love, and loss. On screen, the crew of DS9 moved with a sense of unity and purpose. Off-screen, however, the story was far more complicated. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, and eventually one of the show's most beloved cast members had enough. Terry Farrell, who brought the iconic Jadzia Dax to life, walked away before the final season. What followed was a chapter of Star Trek history that many fans are still processing decades later. Terry Farrell's journey to Deep Space Nine didn't begin in a casting room. It began in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where a small-town girl with a big dream took a leap of faith. In her junior year of high school, she submitted a photo to Elite Model Management in New York. Within 2 days of arriving in the city at just 16 years old, she had landed an exclusive contract with Mademoiselle magazine. That rapid rise carried her to the covers of Italian and German Vogue and into the pages of American Vogue. By any measure, she had made it, but the catwalk wasn't where her heart truly lived. After 18 months in Fashion World, Farrell began studying acting. She kept one foot in modeling to pay the bills, but her focus had shifted. Her early roles reflected the hustle of a young actress building her name one appearance at a time. She played a model in Paper Dolls, had a supporting role in the 1986 comedy Back to School alongside Rodney Dangerfield, and made guest appearances on The Twilight Zone, Quantum Leap, and The Cosby Show. Each role was a stepping stone. By the early 90s, she was chasing parts with real substance. In 1992, she was cast as Kat in the American adaptation of the British sci-fi comedy Red Dwarf. The pilot never aired, dead on arrival, but the disappointment was short-lived. Not long after, Farrell was offered the role that would define her career entirely. When Star Trek Deep Space Nine launched in 1993, it immediately set itself apart from every other entry in the franchise. Rather than following a crew through the stars, DS9 was anchored in one place, a space station near a strategic wormhole on the edge of explored space. It was grittier, more political, and more emotionally demanding than its predecessors. And at the heart of it stood Jadzia Dax. Jadzia was a Trill, a species in which a long-living creature called a symbiont takes up residence inside a host body. The symbiont Dax had already lived through 7 previous hosts before Jadzia, meaning she carried centuries of accumulated memories, skills, and relationships. One of those former hosts, Curzon Dax, had been a close friend of Captain Benjamin Sisko, which gave Jadzia an instant family connection when she arrived aboard the station. She was simultaneously ancient and vibrant, wise and playful, a scientist who could also hold her own among Klingon warriors. Farrell portrayed her with quiet authority and unexpected warmth. Playing Dax gave her something she hadn't yet fully found in her own life at the time. Playing Dax made me feel secure, she once reflected. It was like an anchor. While Farrell herself felt raw and uncertain in her personal life during those years, Jadzia offered a kind of armor, a character whose inner peace and confidence were things to grow into. That authenticity is exactly what audiences felt. Jadzia Dax became the emotional soul of DS9, a beacon of optimism amid the show's often dark and morally complex storylines. Her dynamic with Avery Brooks's Captain Sisko became one of the series' emotional cores. Her friendship with Major Kira, her mischievous side with Klingon culture, and her surprising but deeply compelling romance with Worf all added layers to a character who could easily have been underwritten. Instead, Jadzia Dax was one of the richest, most fully realized figures in all of Star Trek history. And then, at the end of Season 6, she was gone. The truth behind Terry Farrell's departure is more nuanced and more troubling than the simple story of an actress wanting out. After 6 years of punishing filming schedules, Farrell didn't want to quit. She wanted breathing room. Specifically, she asked to appear in roughly half of the 7th and final season's episodes so she could explore other opportunities. It was a reasonable request from someone who had given 6 years of her life to a demanding production. The studio's response was blunt and uncompromising. Do all 26 episodes or do none at all. What followed, by Farrell's account, was a campaign of pressure that crossed professional lines. In the 50-year mission, a comprehensive oral history of Star Trek, Farrell spoke candidly about her conflicts with executive producer Rick Berman. She described comments he made about her physical appearance, including remarks about her body that she found degrading and humiliating. The problems with my leaving were with Rick Berman, she stated plainly. In my opinion, he's just very misogynistic. She noted that this behavior was particularly intense during the early seasons of the show. Rather than genuine negotiation, Farrell described an atmosphere of intimidation. A junior producer reportedly told her she would end up working at Kmart without the show. Phone calls came right before she was due on set, pressuring her to sign the contract. He was trying to bully me into saying yes, she recalled. She wasn't asking for the world. She was asking for a conversation. Instead, she was backed into a corner. Ira Steven Behr, the show's primary creative force during its latter seasons, later said he was largely unaware of the tensions and suggested he might have stepped in or even left with her had he known what was happening. Berman, for his part, denied having the authority to fire her and claimed the studio itself issued the ultimatum. Whatever the precise chain of command, the outcome was the same. Jadzia Dax was killed off in the season 6 finale, Tears of the Prophets, murdered in the Bajoran Temple by a villain possessed by dark, malevolent beings. The Dax symbiont survived and was transplanted into a new host named Ezri, but for much of the audience, something irreplaceable had been lost. The wound ran deep enough that Farrell didn't appear in the series finale. Producers had written a scene for Jadzia, but it was cut due to budget constraints. Farrell also declined to allow her likeness to be used in a flashback montage, a final, quiet signal of just how bitter things had become. In the years following her departure, Farrell joined the cast of the sitcom Becker, a lighter world with lower stakes and none of the creative warfare she had endured. It was a needed change of pace, even if she later admitted the transition wasn't entirely satisfying. It's hard to go from playing a hero to a neurotic bad cook, she said at a convention in 2007, where she also confessed she wished she hadn't left DS9 as early as she did. Her personal life took on a fitting Star Trek quality of its own. In 2002, she married actor Brian Baker, and together they had a son named Max. They divorced in 2015 after more than a decade together. Then, in what felt almost designed for the most devoted fans of the franchise, Farrell became engaged to Adam Nimoy, son of Leonard Nimoy, the man who gave the world Spock. Adam, a television director, had honored his father's legacy with a documentary called For the Love of Spock. The two married in 2017, creating a connection between two of Star Trek's most significant family trees. The marriage ended in 2022, but the story of how those two corners of the franchise briefly joined remains a unique footnote in its history. In 2014, Farrell showed up to the Trek Las Vegas convention in full Trill costume and makeup, wearing a shirt reading Dax 539, a tribute to the 539 times makeup artist Michael Westmore had applied her iconic spots. She thanked the fans for their loyalty and said she would happily return to the franchise in any form as a clone, a hologram, or a version of Jadzia from another universe. Farrell's story cannot be fully understood without understanding the larger war being fought over DS9's soul. That battle was waged primarily between showrunner Ira Steven Behr and franchise overseer Rick Berman. Behr came to DS9 with a vision that was almost heretical by Star Trek standards. Gene Roddenberry had built the franchise on an optimistic premise that humanity had evolved past violence and self-destruction, that the future was one of peace and cooperation. Behr respected that vision, but he believed the most powerful way to honor it was to test it. He wanted a war story, not a skirmish, not a contained conflict, but a full-scale, multi-season interstellar war that would force the characters and the audience to confront what principles actually cost when everything is on the line. Berman was resistant. Roddenberry had been explicit: Star Trek was not a war show. He grudgingly allowed Bear to introduce the Dominion as a threat, expecting the arc to last no more than 6 episodes. It lasted 2 years. The Dominion War that ran from the Season 5 finale through the series' conclusion became one of the most ambitious storytelling efforts in the history of American science fiction television. It was morally complicated in ways that the franchise had never previously dared. In one of the arc's most powerful moments, Captain Sisko conspires in a murder and lies to cover it up in order to bring the Romulans into the war. Standing alone at the end of the episode, he looks into the camera and says with haunted resignation, "I can live with it." It was a line and a moment that would have been unthinkable in earlier versions of Star Trek. Berman later acknowledged he wasn't entirely happy with how long the arc ran, but he kept reading every script and engaging with every twist. In retrospect, even he could see what Bear had built. The Dominion War is now regarded as one of the boldest narrative moves in the franchise's history, morally gray, emotionally devastating, and deeply human in the ways it asked what kind of people we become when everything we believe in is under pressure.